Billionaire signed the divorce papers laughing, then saw her leave in a Bentley with his business partner. You didn't miss me, Arthur. You dismissed me. There's a difference. He sat frozen in that small conference room, watching the woman he had mocked for 3 years stand before him with the kind of quiet power that made his billions feel worthless. What are you talking about? I loved you, Portia. I gave you everything. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him with eyes that held no anger, no bitterness, just the devastating clarity of someone who had finally stopped needing anything from him. No. You loved the idea of having a wife. You loved the convenience of someone who managed your home and impressed your clients and never demanded anything inconvenient like respect or partnership. But me, Arthur, the actual person, you never bothered to know. The words landed like hammers. And the worst part, the part that would haunt Arthur Williams for years to come, was that he couldn't argue. He couldn't spin this. He couldn't charm his way out of the truth she was finally speaking. But let me take you back to where this all began. To a conference room on the 47th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. To a man who thought he was ending a marriage and a woman who was actually beginning a life. To the moment Arthur Williams signed away the most valuable thing he would ever possess, laughing the entire time because he was too blind to see what he was losing. This is a story about what happens when the person you underestimate decides to stop shrinking. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Not to Arthur Williams. He signed the divorce papers with the casual flourish of a man signing a room service receipt, his Mont Blanc gliding across the signature line with practiced elegance. His laughter echoed through the mahogany-paneled conference room, bouncing off walls that had witnessed hostile takeovers worth billions but had never seen anything quite like this particular transaction. Finally, Arthur said, sliding the papers across the polished table toward the waiting attorneys. 3 years of marriage ending with less ceremony than it took to order lunch. I expected more drama from you, Portia. Honestly, I'm almost disappointed. His attorney shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair, but Arthur didn't notice. He rarely noticed discomfort in others unless it directly affected his bottom line. Portia Walker sat across from him, her posture perfect, her expression revealing nothing. She wore a simple black dress, not designer, not expensive, nothing that would suggest she was about to walk away from a man worth $4.2 billion with only what the prenuptial agreement allowed. A modest settlement that wouldn't cover 3 months of rent in the building they currently occupied. She didn't flinch at his laughter. Didn't react to the cruelty dressed up as casual indifference. She simply signed her own name beneath his, the pen moving with the same steadiness that had carried her through 3 years of being treated like furniture that occasionally spoke. Thank you, Arthur, she said, her voice steady as still water. For everything you taught me. He smirked, misreading her gratitude as surrender. This was Arthur's gift and his curse. He saw exactly what he expected to see, never more, never less. What exactly did I teach you? How to spend money you didn't earn. How to throw parties for people who barely tolerated you. How to be decorative without being essential. The words hung in the air like poison. Her attorney, a young woman named Teresa who had been recommended by a friend, kept her expression carefully neutral. But her pen had stopped moving. Even she could feel the weight of what was happening in this room. Portia stood. The movement was graceful, unhurried, completely devoid of the dramatic exit Arthur had apparently hoped to provoke. Goodbye, Arthur. She walked out of the conference room without looking back, her heels clicking against marble floors that had once made her feel small and out of place. Now they felt like a runway. Like she was walking towards something rather than away from it. Arthur watched her go with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had won. He turned to his attorney, already mentally moving on to his afternoon meeting, already calculating which restaurant he would take his next date to now that he was officially single. That went better than expected, he announced. She didn't even cry. Mr. Williams, his attorney said carefully, the settlement is exactly what she deserves, Arthur interrupted. Nothing. She brought nothing to this marriage except a pretty face and a talent for embarrassing me at business functions. He straightened his tie, already bored with this conversation. Have the final document sent to my office. I have actual work to do. He strode toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Manhattan, pulling out his phone to check the messages he had missed during this tedious formality. The city stretched before him like a kingdom, all glass and steel and ambition, everything Arthur Williams believed in. That is when he saw it. A Bentley Continental GT, midnight blue, the exact shade of refined excellence, pulled up to the building's entrance 47 floors below. Even from this height, the car was unmistakable. Arthur had considered purchasing one himself before deciding the brand was too understated for his image. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. Arthur's hand tightened on his phone. Albert Miller. His business partner of 7 years. The man who had helped him build Williams Enterprises from a regional investment firm into a global powerhouse. The man he trusted more than anyone in his professional life. The man he had golfed with last weekend without any indication that something fundamental had shifted in their universe. Arthur watched, frozen, as Albert walked around to the passenger side with the unhurried pace of someone who had done this 100 times. He opened the door with a flourish that spoke of practice and genuine care. Portia emerged. Arthur's breath stopped. She was smiling. Not the careful, controlled smile she had worn throughout their marriage, the one Arthur had mocked as trying too hard. This was radiant. Genuine. The smile of a woman stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. Albert said something that made her laugh, and she touched his arm with easy affection. The familiarity between them was unmistakable. This was not a chance encounter. This was not a first meeting. This was something that had been building for months, perhaps years, right under Arthur's nose while he was too busy looking at himself to notice. They walked together toward a second car, a sleek Tesla that Arthur had never seen before, and Albert opened the passenger door for her with the attentiveness of a man who understood that small gestures mattered more than grand ones. What, Arthur breathed, is happening? His attorney appeared beside him, following his gaze down to the street. Ah. Yes. That would be Mr. Miller. Ms. Walker's business partner. Her what? Business partner. In Lumina Innovations. The tech startup that has been making waves in sustainable energy solutions. The attorney paused, and Arthur could have sworn he detected the faintest hint of enjoyment in his voice. You didn't know? Arthur's world tilted on its axis. Lumina Innovations. He had heard the name mentioned in passing, had seen the headlines about some revolutionary solar storage technology, had meant to look into it at some point when he had time. But he had never connected it to his wife. Never imagined that the woman who planned his dinner parties and selected his ties could be connected to anything of actual importance. Her business partner, Arthur repeated, the words foreign on his tongue. Co-founder, actually. His attorney consulted his tablet with the air of someone who had done thorough research. She is listed as P.A. Walker on the incorporation documents. Chief Technology Officer. The science behind the innovations that have attracted $47 million in venture capital funding. $47 million. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Arthur stared at the street below, but the Bentley was already pulling away. Portia was already gone. And with her went every assumption he had ever made about who she was and what she was capable of. He thought about her hobby room. The guest bedroom she had asked to convert 2 years ago. The door that was always closed. The light he had seen under it late at night when he assumed she was reading romance novels or doing whatever unimportant things unimportant people did with their time. He had never once asked what she was doing in there. He had never once thought to care. Before I take you back to where this all began, before I show you how Portia Walker transformed from dismissed trophy wife to tech industry powerhouse, I need you to understand something. This is not just a story about a billionaire who got what he deserved. This is a story about every person who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by someone who was supposed to love them. If you have ever felt invisible in your own relationship. If you have ever had your dreams laughed at by the person who should have championed them. If you have ever wondered what would happen if you stopped shrinking and started growing. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now. Not for me, but for yourself. Because by the end of this video, you are going to see exactly what happens when someone stops accepting someone else's definition of their worth. Now let me show you the woman Portia Walker was before Arthur Williams decided she was nothing. 5 years before that conference room. Before the divorce papers. Before the Bentley and the business empire and the smile that Arthur had never seen. Portia Walker was someone else entirely. She was 26 years old, standing in a laboratory at MIT, surrounded by equipment that represented the cutting edge of biomedical engineering. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were functional rather than fashionable. Her hands were steady as she calibrated instruments that most people could not even name. She was 6 months away from completing her PhD. Her dissertation on sustainable energy storage solutions had already attracted attention from leading researchers across the country. Her advisor had called her the real deal in a field full of pretenders. Journals were citing her preliminary findings. Companies were starting to reach out about potential applications. Portia Walker was on the verge of everything she had worked her entire life to achieve. She had grown up in a modest home in Columbus, Ohio. Her father taught high school physics, spending his evenings explaining the mysteries of the universe to a daughter who absorbed every word with the hunger of someone who understood that knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you. Her mother was a nurse who worked double shifts without complaint, who taught Portia that caring for others and pursuing excellence were not mutually exclusive goals. They did not have much money. What they had was belief. Belief that their daughter was extraordinary. Belief that hard work could overcome circumstance. Belief that a girl from Ohio could stand among the best minds in the world if she was willing to earn her place. And Portia had earned it. Every scholarship through merit, not connection. Every grade through late nights and sacrifice. Every opportunity through talent that could not be denied. She had worked 3 jobs during undergrad. She had slept on friends' couches when her housing fell through. She had chosen textbooks over meals more times than she could count. And she had made it. Against every odd, she had made it to the threshold of everything she had dreamed of becoming. That is where she was standing when Arthur Williams walked into her life and convinced her to walk away from all of it. The charity gala was not her usual environment. Portia had been asked to attend as a representative of her department's research initiative, a showcase of MIT's brightest minds for potential donors who might fund the next generation of innovation. She wore a dress borrowed from her roommate, slightly too long, a color that did not quite suit her complexion. She felt out of place among the glittering crowd, these people who wore wealth like a second skin, who spoke of money in amounts that could have funded her entire education 10 times over. Arthur Williams noticed her from across the room. Later, Portia would understand that this was his gift. He noticed things that could be useful. He assessed value the way other people assessed weather, automatically, constantly, with an eye toward what could be leveraged. She did not know then what he saw when he looked at her. She thought he saw her intelligence, her potential, the spark that her professors praised. She did not understand that he saw something else entirely. He saw a beautiful woman standing alone. He saw someone who did not fit into this world but clearly wanted to. He saw an opportunity to acquire something valuable without having to work particularly hard for it. "You look like you would rather be anywhere else," he said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne she had not asked for but accepted anyway. That obvious? Only to someone paying attention. He extended his hand. Arthur Williams. Portia knew who he was. Everyone knew who Arthur Williams was. His face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. His company had revolutionized investment banking. His name was synonymous with the kind of success that seemed almost mythological to a girl from Columbus who counted pennies. "Portia Walker," she replied, shaking his hand. "I know," he said. "I made it a point to learn about everyone here tonight. You are with the MIT research team. Something about energy storage." She brightened at this. "Solar energy storage, yes. We are developing technology that could revolutionize how renewable energy is distributed and maintained. The current inefficiency in storage systems is one of the main barriers to widespread solar adoption. If we can solve that, we can fundamentally change how the world generates power." She watched his eyes as she spoke, looking for the glazing over that usually happened when she talked about her work at parties like this. But Arthur kept his gaze fixed on her face. He nodded at appropriate intervals. He asked follow-up questions that suggested he was actually listening. She did not know then that this was his technique. That Arthur Williams had perfected the art of appearing to listen while actually calculating entirely different equations. That his focus was not on her words but on the way her eyes lit up when she spoke, the animation in her face, the passion in her voice. He was cataloging her attractiveness. He was already imagining how she would look on his arm. "That sounds fascinating," he said when she finished. "You clearly have a brilliant mind." "Thank you. It is a shame, though." "What is?" "A face like yours, wasted in a laboratory. The first warning sign." She missed it entirely. Arthur's pursuit over the following months was relentless and intoxicating. Private jets to Paris for dinner. His full attention whenever they were together, or what felt like his full attention. Introductions at parties where he called her my brilliant girlfriend, emphasizing both words like they carried equal weight. Portia had never been pursued like this. Had never experienced what unlimited resources felt like when directed toward making someone feel special. Arthur sent flowers to her laboratory every week, remembering details about her research that made her feel seen. He asked about her dissertation progress, nodded along as she explained breakthroughs, told her he admired her dedication. He promised her things. That was his specialty. You work too hard, he said one evening, 3 months into their relationship. She was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, trying to balance her final dissertation push with the demands of dating a man who expected her presence at events multiple times per week. I have to, she replied. My defense is in 6 months. He pulled her close, his voice soft and seemingly caring. I worry about you. You are running yourself ragged. Maybe you should take a break. Just for a little while. I cannot take a break. I am so close. His hands moved to her shoulders, massaging gently. I just want to take care of you. You do not have to prove anything to anyone, Portia. Not anymore. You have me now. The words were wrapped in velvet, but there were thorns underneath that she did not feel until it was too late. The suggestions became more frequent. More insistent. More difficult to argue against. Why do you need a PhD when you already have me? Can you really build a career and a marriage at the same time? I want to give you the life you deserve. A life where you never have to work again. Looking back, Portia could identify the exact moment she surrendered. It was not a dramatic scene. There was no ultimatum, no tearful confrontation. It was quieter than that. More insidious. Arthur proposed with a ring that cost more than her parents' house. She said yes with joy that she genuinely felt. And somewhere in the celebration that followed, in the champagne toasts and the planning sessions and the dizzying whirlwind of becoming Mrs. Arthur Williams, her PhD fell away. She told herself it was temporary. She could always go back. She told herself she was making a choice, not being pushed. She told herself this was what love required. She did not understand then that what Arthur was offering was not partnership. It was ownership. Her advisor's disappointment still haunted her. The conversation she had tried to forget, sitting in his office 6 weeks before what should have been her dissertation defense. Portia, you are 6 months away from becoming Dr. Walker. From credentials that no one can take from you. From a career that could change the world. Are you certain about this? Arthur says I can always come back. After we are settled. Her advisor had looked at her with something she refused to identify as pity. In my experience, Ms. Walker, very few people who leave this close to the finish line ever find their way back. She had thanked him for his concern and walked out. She had chosen Arthur's certainty over her own potential because at 26, she still believed that being loved was more valuable than being accomplished. She was wrong about both things, as it turned out. The wedding was everything Arthur wanted it to be. 400 guests in a Manhattan cathedral, covered by every society publication that mattered, photographed from every angle that flattered the groom. Portia's family sat in the back rows, looking uncomfortable in clothes purchased specifically for an occasion they did not fully understand. Her father's physics teacher salary had not prepared him for a world where a single floral arrangement cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Her mother kept adjusting the collar of her new dress, a nervous habit that Portia recognized from childhood. She should have noticed that the guest list was entirely composed of Arthur's people. That her friends from graduate school had been squeezed into seats behind distant Williams relatives. That even the seating chart was a power statement, and she had been positioned as an accessory rather than a partner. She should have noticed that Arthur checked his phone during their first dance. That his toast mentioned his own accomplishments without once acknowledging hers. That when people congratulated them, they spoke to Arthur while looking through her. But she was in love. And love, she had convinced herself, meant overlooking imperfections. Meant trusting that things would get better. Meant believing that the man who had pursued her so relentlessly would continue to see her once the chase was over. The first year of marriage taught her otherwise. It started small. So small that she could convince herself it was not happening at all. The guest bedroom she asked to convert into a home office. Arthur had agreed with the kind of dismissive wave that said he was not really listening. Sure, if it makes you happy. Your little hobby room. Hobby room. Not office. Not workspace. Hobby room. A diminutive for a diminished life. Her research papers, the publications that had once defined her identity, ended up in boxes in the basement. Arthur said they cluttered the aesthetic of the house. He said they made her seem like she could not move on from her old life. He said it with a smile that made it sound like concern rather than control. She started being introduced as Arthur's wife instead of by her name. At dinner parties, she would hear him say it with casual possession. You have met my wife, haven't you? Never you have met Portia. Never she has fascinating insights about energy storage. Never she was 6 months from a PhD before she gave it up for me. Just my wife. As if the name itself was irrelevant. The jokes came next. Arthur had a gift for humiliation disguised as humor. Portia was going to be a scientist, can you believe it? He would announce this at dinner parties to business associates who laughed politely at the absurdity of the idea. She used to spend all day in a laboratory playing with beakers and things. Now she plans my dinner parties. Much better use of her talents. The table would laugh. Portia would smile. Because what else could she do? Argue with her husband in front of his colleagues? Explain that she had been 6 months from credentials that would have made her their peer rather than their entertainment. So she smiled. And with each smile, she felt another piece of herself disappear. Year 2 of the marriage brought new refinements to her disappearance. Her wardrobe transformed without her fully consenting to the transformation. Arthur would come home with dresses he had selected, designers he preferred, colors that suited his vision of who she should be. Her comfortable clothes, her practical shoes, her own aesthetic vanished piece by piece until she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger in expensive wrapping. Her days became organized around his needs. His dinner preferences. His entertainment schedule. His expectations for what a wife should do and be and say and wear. She stopped mentioning her old research. Stopped reading scientific journals where she might see citations of her abandoned work. Stopped dreaming about what might have been because the dreams had become too painful to sustain. But something inside her refused to die entirely. Late at night, after Arthur fell asleep in their California king bed, Portia would slip down the hallway to her hobby room. The door that was always closed. The light that he never noticed burning at 2 in the morning. She had told herself she was just staying current. Just reading papers to keep her mind sharp. Just tinkering with ideas that would never go anywhere because she was not a scientist anymore. She was just a wife. But the tinkering became designing. The ideas became prototypes. The abandoned dissertation became the foundation for something new. In secret, in shame, in the small hours when no one was watching, Portia Walker began to remember who she was. She did not know yet that she was building an empire. She only knew that she was building something. And that something was the only thing keeping her alive inside a marriage that was slowly killing everything else she was. Before I continue with how Portia's secret work attracted the attention of someone who would change everything, I need to pause and ask you something. Have you ever built something in the shadows because you were afraid to let it see the light? Have you ever worked on a dream in secret because someone made you feel ashamed of wanting more than they decided you deserved? That is exactly where Portia was. Hidden in a room her husband dismissed as irrelevant, creating technology that would revolutionize an industry, while the man who was supposed to love her laughed at the very idea of her having ambition. If this story is hitting home for you, I need you to hit that like button right now. Not for the algorithm. For the reminder that your value does not decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Now let me show you what happened when someone finally looked at Portia Walker and saw what Arthur was too blind to notice. The charity gala was indistinguishable from every other charity gala Portia had attended as Arthur's wife. The same glittering crowd. The same conversations that went nowhere. The same expectation that she would smile and nod and disappear into the background while her husband worked the room. She stood at the edge of the ballroom in a gown Arthur had selected, a color that washed out her complexion but matched the event's theme. Her champagne had gone warm in her hand. She had stopped counting the hours until she could go home. Your husband, said a voice beside her, has remarkably poor vision for a man who runs an investment empire. Portia turned to find a man she recognized immediately. Albert Miller. Arthur's business partner of 7 years. The one Arthur called indispensable in meetings and boring at parties. The one whose quiet competence had built much of what Arthur took credit for. I am sorry. Portia asked. He handed her a fresh glass of champagne, exchanging it for her warm one without asking. I said Arthur has poor vision. He looks at you and sees a wife. An accessory. Someone to plan his parties and select his ties. Portia felt her spine stiffen. I don't know what you mean. Yes you do. Albert's voice was kind but direct. I have been watching you at these events for 2 years. You listen to conversations with an analytical precision that most of these executives cannot manage after 3 drinks. You see power dynamics they miss entirely. You ask questions in your head that you never voice because somewhere along the way, someone convinced you that your thoughts were not worth speaking. Portia stared at him. No one had spoken to her like this in 3 years. No one had suggested that the silence she maintained was a choice rather than a natural state. Why are you telling me this? Because I have been working on something. A technology initiative in sustainable energy. I have the business infrastructure and the funding connections, but I am missing the science. The real innovation that could make this work. He paused, studying her face. And then I remembered that Arthur once mentioned, as a joke at one of his dinner parties, that his wife used to study something about solar energy before she came to her senses and gave it up. Portia felt her heart rate increase. That was 3 years ago. Genius does not expire, Ms. Walker. It just waits for someone who knows how to recognize it. She should have walked away. Should have smiled politely and returned to her position as Arthur's silent shadow. Should have protected the fragile equilibrium of her marriage, even if that equilibrium was slowly suffocating her. Instead, she heard herself say, I have a degree in biomedical engineering. I was 6 months from finishing my PhD when I married Arthur. I was working on solar energy storage solutions that could have changed how renewable energy is distributed globally. Albert nodded as if she was confirming something he already knew. And have you stopped working on those solutions? The question hung in the air. The truth that she had never spoken to anyone. The secret of her late-night sessions in the hobby room Arthur had never bothered to enter. No, she admitted quietly. I have not stopped. I work in secret. At night. When he is asleep. Would you be willing to share what you have developed? Not as a favor to me. As a potential partnership. My husband would not approve. Albert's expression did not change. I am not asking your husband. I am asking you. It was the first time in 3 years that anyone had made that distinction. They met 3 days later at a coffee shop on the Upper West Side, far enough from Arthur's usual haunts that there was no risk of discovery. Portia arrived with a flash drive containing 3 years of secret work, her hands trembling slightly as she handed it over. If this is a test, she said, if you are reporting back to Arthur about what his wife does behind his back, I need you to know that I am prepared for the consequences. Albert took the flash drive with the same steady calm he brought to everything. This is not a test, Ms. Walker. And I would never report to Arthur about you. What happens between us, professionally or otherwise, is not his business. He reviewed her work over the following week. The equations she had refined. The prototypes she had designed without access to proper equipment. The innovations she had developed in isolation, building on the research she had abandoned but never forgotten. When they met again, his expression had changed. He looked at her the way her old PhD advisor had looked at her. The way no one had looked at her since she became Mrs. Arthur Williams. Do you understand, he said slowly, what you have created here? It is just theoretical work. Without proper testing, without laboratory access. This is not just theoretical. This is revolutionary. The efficiency improvements in your storage designs alone could reduce solar energy costs by 40%. The applications for grid-level storage could change how entire nations generate power. He set down her specifications and looked her directly in the eyes. This is Nobel Prize caliber innovation, Portia. And you developed it in a guest bedroom while your husband made jokes about you at dinner parties. She felt tears threatening and blinked them back. The validation was almost too much to absorb after years of being told she was nothing. What do I do with it? She asked. I have no laboratory. No funding. No credibility anymore. I am just Arthur Williams' wife. No, Albert said firmly. You are a brilliant scientist who happens to be married to a man too blind to see what he has. That is not your limitation. That is his failure. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. I have access to funding. I have business connections. I have everything needed to turn theoretical work into commercial reality. What I do not have is someone who can actually build the technology. You want to partner with me. I want to invest in genius, Albert corrected. I want to help you build something that matters. Not for Arthur. Not for me. For you. Portia thought about her hobby room. Her secret files. The woman she used to be and the woman she had become. If Arthur finds out. Then we will deal with that when it happens. But Portia, I need you to hear something. Your husband has spent 3 years convincing you that you are worthless. That your only value is in supporting his ambitions. That your mind, your talent, your potential are things to be ashamed of. He was wrong. He has always been wrong. And I think you know that. She did know it. Somewhere beneath the layers of doubt and dismissal, she had always known it. The late-night work sessions were not just habit. They were survival. They were the part of her that refused to accept Arthur's definition of who she was allowed to be. Yes, she said finally. Let us build something. They filed incorporation papers the following month. Lumina Innovations was born under the name P.A. Walker, a name that meant nothing to industry observers but would eventually mean everything to Arthur Williams. What followed was the most difficult and exhilarating period of Portia's life. She maintained two existences simultaneously. By day, she was Arthur's wife, planning dinner parties and selecting ties and smiling at people who looked through her. By night, she was chief technology officer of a company that was rapidly attracting the attention of major investors. Her hobby room became a command center. The closed door that Arthur never questioned because he never cared what happened behind it. The light burning at 2 a.m. because breakthroughs did not respect sleep schedules. Albert visited when Arthur was traveling, which was often. They worked through prototypes and patents and the endless details of building something from nothing. He treated her as an equal in every conversation. He asked for her opinions and actually listened to her answers. He challenged her ideas not to diminish them but to strengthen them. It was, Portia realized, what partnership was supposed to look like. The company grew faster than either of them had anticipated. The technology worked even better than her theoretical models had predicted. Investors who initially dismissed sustainable energy as a niche market began paying attention when they saw the efficiency numbers. $47 million in venture capital funding. Patents valued at 3 times that amount. Contracts pending with European governments for national grid integration. Pilot programs launching across Southeast Asia. All of it built in the shadows while Arthur Williams laughed at his wife's hobby room. The irony was not lost on Portia. The man who dismissed her as worthless was indirectly funding her liberation. Every dinner party she planned gave her cover for video calls with development teams. Every charity event she attended connected her with investors who did not know they were meeting P.A. Walker, the scientist behind the revolution. She was hiding in plain sight. And Arthur never suspected a thing. Because Arthur never looked. He never asked about her days. Never wondered why she seemed distracted at breakfast. Never questioned the light under her door or the new energy in her step. He saw exactly what he expected to see, a wife who existed to serve his needs, and he never bothered to look deeper. His blindness was her freedom. His arrogance was her opportunity. His certainty that she was nothing gave her the space to become everything. By the time she walked into that conference room to sign divorce papers, Portia Walker was already worth more than the settlement Arthur thought he was denying her. By the time she thanked him for everything he had taught her, she meant it in ways he could not begin to understand. He had taught her that waiting for validation from the wrong person was a waste of a life. He had taught her that love without respect was not love at all. He had taught her that the people who underestimate you the most are often giving you the most valuable gift, the freedom to prove them wrong without them ever seeing it coming. She walked out of that conference room knowing she would never need anything from Arthur Williams again. And when she climbed into Albert's Bentley 30 minutes later, she was not leaving a marriage. She was arriving at the life she should have been living all along. Now, let me take you back to Arthur. To the 47th floor of his empire. To the moment his world shattered and the investigation that followed. Because what Arthur discovered in the days after that conference room would haunt him more than any business loss he had ever suffered. And what he learned about the woman he had dismissed for 3 years would force him to confront a truth about himself that no amount of money could fix. Arthur Williams canceled every meeting for the next 3 days. His assistant had never seen anything like it. In 7 years of managing his schedule, she had never known him to cancel so much as a coffee meeting, let alone 48 hours of carefully arranged appointments. Arthur Williams was a machine. Arthur Williams did not stop. But Arthur Williams had never watched his wife drive away with his business partner before. He sat in his corner office, the Manhattan skyline stretching before him like a mockery of everything he thought he had conquered, and he began to search. Lumina Innovations. The name that had meant nothing to him yesterday now consumed his every thought. He pulled up financial databases, industry reports, news articles that stretched back 14 months. With each piece of information he uncovered, his understanding of his own life crumbled further. The company had launched quietly, without the fanfare that usually accompanied significant venture capital investments. P.A. Walker was listed as co-founder and chief technology officer. Albert Miller as co-founder and CEO. The partnership was described in glowing terms by everyone who covered the industry. A perfect marriage of scientific innovation and business acumen, one article proclaimed. Walker's technological vision combined with Miller's strategic expertise has created something unprecedented in the sustainable energy sector. Arthur stared at the words. A perfect marriage. The phrase felt like a personal attack. He dug deeper. Patent filings revealed technology that made his investment analysts whistle when he showed them the specifications. This is groundbreaking, his chief technology consultant said. Whoever developed this is operating at a level that most researchers cannot even conceptualize. Whoever developed this was the woman Arthur had dismissed as decorative for 3 years. He found videos. Conference presentations where Portia spoke with authority he had never heard from her, explaining complex concepts to rooms full of industry leaders who listened with the attention he had only ever received when discussing money. She was confident. Articulate. Commanding. She was nothing like the silent shadow who had stood beside him at dinner parties. Or rather, she was exactly like that woman. He had simply never bothered to look. The hobby room. The phrase haunted him now. He remembered her asking to convert the guest bedroom. He remembered his dismissive wave. He remembered never once walking through that door, never once asking what she was doing with her time, never once imagining that her time could possibly be spent on anything of value. He had assumed she was reading magazines, watching television, doing whatever empty things empty people did. The possibility that she was building $100 million company had never crossed his mind. Because he had never allowed himself to see her as someone capable of building anything at all. On the third day, Arthur appeared at Lumina Innovations headquarters. The building was nothing like Williams Enterprises. Where his offices proclaimed power through marble and mahogany, Lumina occupied a converted warehouse that hummed with creative energy. Open workspaces where young engineers collaborated without hierarchy. Glass walls that suggested transparency rather than intimidation. Plants and natural light everywhere he looked. This was what Portia had built. This was the vision she had executed while he was busy dismissing her. The security guard at the entrance was polite but firm. Mr. Williams, you are not on the approved visitor list. I am Arthur Williams. I was. He could not complete the sentence. What was he? Her husband. Not anymore. Important? Not here. The man who had defined her existence for 3 years. Clearly not. I need to speak with P.A. Walker, he managed. Ms. Walker is unavailable for unscheduled meetings. If you would like to submit a formal request through our communications office, I can provide you with the appropriate contact information. Arthur had never submitted a formal request for anything in his life. He was the one who received requests. He was the one who granted audiences. He was the one with the power. Except here. Here, he was no one. Tell her, he said, his voice breaking on words he had never imagined speaking. Tell her that I am sorry. That I did not understand. That I need 5 minutes. The security guard's expression softened slightly. I will pass along the message, sir. But I cannot guarantee a response. Arthur waited in the lobby for 4 hours. He watched employees come and go, witnessed the casual brilliance in their conversations, felt the creative energy of a workplace where people were valued for their contributions rather than their compliance. Young engineers discussed problems with veteran scientists who listened without condescension. Ideas bounced between departments without the territorial battles that defined Williams Enterprises. This was what Portia valued. This was what she had created. And it was everything his company was not. At 4:17 in the afternoon, a door opened and she emerged. She looked different, or perhaps she simply looked like herself for the first time since he had known her. Her hair fell naturally instead of in the style he had preferred. She wore jeans and a blazer, professional but comfortable. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. This was not the woman who had sat silently at his dinner parties. This was the woman she had been all along, hidden beneath the layers of his expectations. Arthur, she said. Her voice was calm and professional. You wanted 5 minutes. I want to understand, he replied, standing on legs that felt less steady than they had in decades. How did I miss this? How did I miss you? Portia studied him for a moment. Something flickered in her eyes that might have been pity, might have been sadness, might have been nothing at all. Come with me, she said finally. She led him to a small conference room. The table was modest. The chairs were functional. Everything about this space was designed for work rather than intimidation. They sat across from each other. The distance between them felt infinite. You did not miss me, Portia said. Her voice carried no anger, which somehow made her words more devastating. You dismissed me. There is a difference. Missing implies you were looking. You were never looking, Arthur. You decided on our wedding day who I would be in your life, and you never questioned that decision. Not once. He wanted to argue. Wanted to defend himself. But what defense could he offer? She was stating facts, not opinions. The technology you developed, he began. It is extraordinary. You could have told me. I tried. The words landed like a physical blow. Every time I mentioned wanting to work again, you laughed. Every time I brought up my research background, you changed the subject. Every time I showed the slightest ambition beyond being your accessory, you made me feel foolish for wanting more. I did not mean. It does not matter what you meant. It matters what you did. You taught me that my voice did not matter. That my ideas were worthless. That my role was to be seen and not heard. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried something almost like gratitude. But you also taught me something valuable. You taught me that I would never again give someone the power to define my worth. So thank you, Arthur. For that lesson, I am genuinely grateful. Arthur felt something crack inside him. The carefully constructed certainty that had carried him through life, the assumption that he was always the smartest person in any room, that his judgments were always correct, that the world existed to validate his perspective. It was all falling apart. Portia, I loved you. She shook her head slowly. No. You loved the idea of having a wife. You loved the convenience of someone who managed your home and impressed your clients and never demanded anything inconvenient like respect or partnership. Her eyes met his directly. But me, the actual person, you never bothered to know. The words echoed in the small conference room. Arthur had no response. No clever comeback. No way to spin this narrative in his favor. For the first time in his life, he had to simply sit with the truth of who he had been. And what about Albert, he asked finally, the question painful but necessary. Do you love him? Portia's expression softened in a way it never had for Arthur. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Albert sees me, she said simply. He listens when I talk. He values my contributions. He treats me as an equal rather than an accessory. She paused. That is not love, not yet. But it is the foundation that love requires. Something we never had. I could change, Arthur offered, and even as the words left his mouth, he heard how hollow they sounded. How many times had he dismissed such promises from others? How thoroughly had he proven himself incapable of the growth he was now claiming? Maybe, Portia agreed. Maybe you could. But not for me, Arthur. If you change, let it be for yourself. Because you recognize that the man you have been is not the man you want to be. Not because you have suddenly realized that the woman you discarded was worth more than you knew. She stood, signaling the end of his 5 minutes. What happens now? He asked. Portia looked down at him with something that might have been compassion. Now, Lumina continues to grow. We are launching in 3 new markets next quarter. I am giving a keynote at the World Energy Summit in Geneva. I am building the life I should have been building all along. She moved toward the door. And you are going to discover what it feels like when the people you dismissed move on without you. Her hand rested on the door handle. I hope you learn from it, Arthur. I really do. For your sake. She walked out. The door closed behind her with quiet finality. Not a slam, just a click. The sound of someone who no longer needed the last word. Arthur sat alone in the empty conference room. Outside, he could hear the sounds of Lumina innovations continuing, brilliant people doing meaningful work, a company thriving without any need for his validation or input. He had nothing clever to say. Nothing strategic to plan. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Arthur Williams had to simply feel the weight of his own failures without any distraction. And the weight was crushing. I want you to stop for a moment and think about what just happened. Portia did not scream. She did not cry. She did not beg for the apology she deserved or demand the acknowledgement she had earned. She simply told the truth and walked away. That is what real power looks like. Not the power to hurt someone who hurt you. The power to stop needing anything from them at all. If you have ever wondered what it would feel like to be that free. If you have ever imagined walking away from someone who diminished you with nothing but your own peace of mind. If you have ever wanted to know what happens when you stop asking for permission to be extraordinary. Keep watching. Because Portia's story is not over. And neither is Arthur's. But before we continue, I need to ask you something. Are you the person someone is underestimating right now? Are you the one being dismissed, overlooked, or defined by someone else's limited vision? Drop a comment below. Tell me about it. Because I read every single comment, and I want you to know that your story matters too. Now let me show you how this ends. 6 months passed. In that time, the world changed for both of them, though in vastly different ways. For Portia Walker, the months brought triumph after triumph. Lumina Innovations completed its merger with 3 smaller sustainable energy companies, creating a collective that industry analysts called the most significant development in renewable energy since solar panels became commercially viable. Her face appeared on the cover of Forbes, Wired, and Time. Her story became a phenomenon, shared by millions of women who saw themselves in her journey from dismissed wife to industry revolutionary. The headlines wrote themselves. From trophy wife to tech titan, the Portia Walker story. The scientist her billionaire husband laughed at is now worth more than his company. How one woman built an empire while her husband built jokes at her expense. Portia did not seek the attention. She did not give interviews about Arthur or their marriage or the years she spent being diminished. When journalists pressed her for details about her ex-husband, she simply said that she preferred to focus on the future rather than the past. But the past had a way of telling its own story. People who had attended Arthur's dinner parties came forward with their recollections. Former employees of Williams Enterprises shared observations about how Arthur had spoken about his wife. The narrative built itself without Portia having to say a word. And through it all, she kept building. The Geneva summit was everything she had dreamed of and more. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of world leaders and industry pioneers, Portia felt the full weight of how far she had traveled. She thought about the girl from Columbus who had worked 3 jobs to afford textbooks. She thought about the PhD candidate who had been 6 months from credentials that would have validated everything she knew about herself. She thought about the wife who had worked in secret, terrified of discovery, building something meaningful in the shadows of a marriage that was trying to erase her. All of those women had led her to this moment. Thank you, she began, her voice steady and strong. I was once told that I did not need to work. That supporting someone else's dreams was enough of a dream for me. That my education, my talents, my potential were luxuries I did not need because I had a husband who was successful enough for both of us. The audience was silent. Thousands of people hanging on her words. I believed it. For 3 years, I believed it. She paused, letting the confession settle. This award is not about proving that person wrong. It is about proving to every woman who has ever been told to shrink, to make herself smaller, quieter, less threatening to someone else's ego, that your value does not decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. The applause began before she finished the sentence, building like a wave until it crashed over the entire auditorium. But Portia was not done. You do not need permission to be extraordinary. You do not need validation from people who refuse to see you. You do not need to wait for someone to believe in you before you believe in yourself. Her voice grew stronger. Build anyway. Create anyway. Become anyway. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Portia stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, watching industry leaders and young engineers and women from every corner of the globe rise to their feet. In the front row, Albert stood with the rest, pride evident in every line of his face. He had believed in her when she had forgotten how to believe in herself. He had seen what Arthur had been too blind to notice. And now he was watching her claim the recognition she had always deserved. After the ceremony, they found a quiet corner away from the crowds of people seeking her attention. How do you feel? Albert asked. Portia considered the question seriously. Like I finally understand what my father meant when he said that knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you. He would be proud. He is proud. She smiled. I called my parents this morning. My mother cried for 20 minutes. My father kept saying I told you so over and over again. Albert laughed. The sound was warm and familiar. They had been through so much together, building something from nothing, navigating the complexities of her divorce and the company's explosive growth and the strange new territory of their evolving relationship. I have something to ask you, Albert said. His voice had shifted, becoming more serious. Portia looked at him. What is it? He reached into his jacket and produced a small box. Not a ring box, she noticed immediately. Something different. This is not a proposal, he said quickly. I know you need time before anything like that. I know the last thing you want is to feel rushed into another commitment. Then what is it? He opened the box. Inside was a key. Simple, silver, unremarkable except for what it represented. I bought a house, Albert explained. In Malibu. Overlooking the ocean. I thought maybe, if you wanted, you might like to see it. No pressure. No expectations. Just two people who have built something incredible together, maybe building something personal together too. Portia took the key. Turned it over in her hands. Felt the weight of what he was offering. Not a declaration. Not a demand. Just an invitation. I would like that, she said. I would like that very much. They did not rush. Neither of them wanted to repeat the mistakes of Portia's past. Instead, they built their relationship the same way they had built their company, carefully, intentionally, with attention to the foundation that would determine whether the structure could stand. Weekend visits became weeknight dinners. Separate residences became shared spaces. The professional partnership that had saved Portia's sense of self gradually evolved into a personal partnership that neither of them had expected but both of them cherished. When Albert proposed, 8 months after Geneva, it was nothing like Portia's first engagement. No grand gestures. No overwhelming pressure. Just a quiet evening on the deck of the Malibu house, watching the sun set over the Pacific, and a simple question. I want to spend the rest of my life being your partner, Albert said. In everything. Will you marry me? Yes. The word came easily because the choice had been made long before he asked. Yes, I will. Their wedding was the opposite of everything Arthur had planned for Portia years earlier. 40 guests instead of 400. A ceremony on the beach instead of a cathedral. Her parents in the front row, finally comfortable, finally celebrating something they understood. Portia's father walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. I always knew, he whispered as they approached Albert. I always knew you were meant for something extraordinary. Thanks for believing when I forgot how, she whispered back. The vows they exchanged were written themselves. No officiant script. No traditional promises that had lost meaning through repetition. Just two people saying exactly what they meant to each other. I promise to see you, Albert said. Every day. Even when it is hard. Even when I am tired. Even when life gets complicated. I promise to never stop looking at who you actually are. Portia felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I promise to never disappear again. To never let anyone, including myself, convince me that I am less than I am. And I promise to be your partner, truly, in everything we build together. The kiss that sealed their marriage was tender rather than performative. The applause from their small gathering was genuine rather than obligatory. Everything about this moment was real in ways that Portia's first wedding had never been. As they walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, Portia caught a glimpse of the ocean stretching toward the horizon. Infinite possibility. Endless potential. A future that belonged to her. She had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And somehow, impossibly, that worst thing had led her to the best. While Portia was building her new life, Arthur Williams was dismantling his old one. The 6 months following their conference room conversation had been the most difficult of his existence. Not because of business losses or financial setbacks, the things he had always measured himself by. Because of something far more painful. Self-examination. His therapist's name was Dr. Gerald. She was the first person in Arthur's life who was completely unimpressed by his wealth, his reputation, his carefully cultivated image of success. She saw through every deflection, challenged every excuse, refused to let him escape into the comfortable narratives he had constructed about himself. Tell me about your marriage, she said in their first session. It failed, Arthur replied. Obviously. That is what happened. I asked you about the marriage itself. What it was like. How you felt. Who you were within it. I was successful. I provided everything she could have wanted. I built an empire while she what? Arthur stopped. The sentence he had been about to speak, the dismissal he had made 1,000 times, suddenly felt hollow. While she built her own empire, he finished quietly. Apparently. Tell me more about that. About discovering what your wife had accomplished without your knowledge. Arthur stared at the floor of her office. He had never stared at floors before. He had always been the one people looked up to, not the one looking down in shame. I did not know, he said. I did not know anything about her work. About her days. About what she was doing in the room I called her hobby space. Why not? Because I never asked. Because I assumed there was nothing worth knowing. And now? Now I understand that I was not just wrong about her. I was wrong about everything. About what mattered. About what success actually means. About the kind of man I was. Dr. Gerald let the silence stretch before responding. That awareness is the first step. But awareness without action is just sophisticated self-pity. What are you going to do with what you now understand? Arthur did not have an answer. Not yet. But he found one, slowly, over the weeks and months that followed. He started by listening. Actually listening, not just performing attention while his mind calculated other things. In meetings, he forced himself to hear the ideas he would previously have dismissed. From his assistant, he solicited honest feedback about how he treated people. From former colleagues who had distanced themselves over the years, he asked uncomfortable questions about who he had been. The answers were not flattering. You talk over people, his assistant admitted when he pressed her for honesty. You make decisions before anyone finishes presenting alternatives. You dismiss ideas that do not come from people you consider important. You. She hesitated. What else? You make people feel small, she continued. Not always with words. Sometimes just with a look. A tone. The way you check your phone while someone is speaking. People learn quickly that their thoughts do not matter to you unless they align with what you have already decided. Arthur absorbed this. It hurt more than he expected. Why did you stay? He asked. If I am so difficult to work with? Because you pay well. And because underneath the arrogance, I always suspected there might be a decent person. I just never saw evidence of him until recently. He made changes. Small at first, then larger. He restructured Williams Enterprises to amplify voices that had been ignored, creating channels for employees at every level to contribute ideas. He promoted women who had been passed over. He established mentorship programs connecting senior executives with junior staff who might otherwise never be noticed. He read books he would have mocked before. Attended seminars about emotional intelligence that would have made the old Arthur laugh. Learned vocabulary for things he had never bothered to name, concepts like active listening and psychological safety and the difference between power and leadership. None of it fixed what he had done to Portia. He understood that some damage could not be repaired, only learned from. But he was determined to ensure that no one else would suffer the same treatment he had inflicted on the woman he should have loved. Do you think you have changed? Dr. Gerald asked during one of their later sessions. Arthur considered the question carefully. I think I have started to change. I do not know if that is the same thing. What is the difference? Starting to change means I have identified the problems and begun working on them. Actually changing means I have maintained that work long enough for it to become who I am rather than just what I am doing. I am not there yet. That level of self-awareness is rare, Mr. Williams. Most people in your position never achieve even the starting point. Most people in my position never have to watch their ex-wife drive away in their business partner's Bentley after building $100 million company in their spare bedroom, Arthur replied. Motivation matters. Dr. Gerald almost smiled. Progress comes from wherever we find it. Arthur did find progress, though it was slow and often painful. He learned to apologize without qualifying his apologies. He learned to accept criticism without defending himself. He learned to ask questions instead of making pronouncements. Most importantly, he learned to see people he had previously looked through. His company's culture began to shift. Employees who had kept their heads down started speaking up. Innovations that had been suppressed by fear began emerging. Williams Enterprises became, gradually, a place where people were valued for their contributions rather than their compliance. It was not redemption. Arthur was clear-eyed about that. What he had done to Portia, the years of dismissal and diminishment, could not be erased by any amount of institutional improvement. But it was change. Real change. The kind that might prevent someone else from suffering what she had suffered. And that, Arthur decided, would have to be enough. The industry gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, an annual gathering of the business elite that Arthur had attended every year for the past decade. In the past, he had worked these rooms like a general surveying a battlefield, identifying targets, calculating advantages, leaving every conversation feeling like he had won something. Tonight felt different. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching rather than hunting. The room was filled with people he knew, deals he had made, relationships he had cultivated for their strategic value rather than their human worth. And then he saw her. Portia was surrounded by people, every one of them eager for her attention. She wore a simple blue dress that cost a fraction of what the other women in the room had spent on their gowns, but she radiated something that no amount of money could purchase. Confidence. Purpose. The quiet power of someone who had nothing left to prove. Albert stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back with the protective attentiveness of a partner who understood that his role was to support rather than overshadow. They moved together through the crowd with the easy synchronization of people who had learned to trust each other completely. Arthur watched them for a long moment. The way Portia laughed at something a young woman said to her. The way she bent down to speak directly to an entrepreneur who was clearly nervous about approaching someone so accomplished. The way she treated everyone in the room as worthy of her attention. She had not always been like this. Or perhaps she had always been like this, and Arthur had simply never allowed himself to see it. Their eyes met across the room. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Two people who had once shared a life, now occupying completely different worlds. The man who had laughed while signing divorce papers. The woman who had walked away with nothing but her dignity and built everything else from scratch. Portia nodded once. A small acknowledgement of their shared history. Then she turned away, returning her attention to the people who actually wanted it. Arthur understood the message. He was not rejected. He was simply irrelevant. And somehow, that felt appropriate. He did not approach her. Did not attempt conversation. Did not try to insert himself into her new life. Instead, he raised his glass slightly in her direction, a silent acknowledgement of the woman she had become. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. There was nothing for him here. The old Arthur had attended these events to be seen, to network, to accumulate more power and influence. The new Arthur understood that presence without purpose was just performance. And he was tired of performing. Outside, the New York air was crisp and clear. Arthur handed his valet ticket to the attendant and waited for his car, thinking about the evening he had just witnessed. Portia was happy. Genuinely, visibly happy in a way she had never been during their marriage. She had built something remarkable, found someone who valued her, become the woman she had always been capable of becoming. And he had been the obstacle she had to overcome to get there. The truth was painful but necessary. Arthur had spent his life believing he was the protagonist of every story. The hero whose success elevated everyone around him. The center around which lesser people orbited. But in Portia's story, he was the villain. The antagonist whose blindness had to be escaped. The challenge that had to be overcome. And in his own story, he was something worse. He was the fool who had held something precious and thrown it away because he was too arrogant to recognize its value. His car arrived. Arthur climbed in and gave the driver his address, then sat in silence as Manhattan slid past the windows. He thought about the donation he had made to Portia's environmental foundation. A significant contribution, given anonymously, designated for projects in underserved communities. She would never know it came from him. That was the point. He was not seeking credit or reconciliation. He was simply trying to do something good with resources he had spent his life accumulating for purely selfish reasons. He thought about the changes he had made at Williams Enterprises. The employees who were thriving now that fear was no longer the dominant management strategy. The innovations emerging from people who had been silenced for years. The culture that was slowly becoming something he could be proud of. He thought about his therapy sessions, the ongoing work of understanding how he had become someone who hurt people without noticing. The patterns he had inherited from a father who measured worth in achievements. The insecurities he had masked with arrogance. The fear of vulnerability that had made real intimacy impossible. Change was slow. Change was painful. Change was the work of a lifetime rather than a moment. But Arthur was committed to it. Not because he hoped for reconciliation with Portia. That chapter was closed. Not because he was seeking redemption for specific wrongs. Some things could not be redeemed, only learned from. He was committed because he finally understood that the man he had been was not the man he wanted to be. And that understanding, once achieved, made the old way of living impossible. The car pulled up to his apartment building. Arthur thanked the driver and walked inside, past the doorman who had known him for years, into the elevator that carried him to the penthouse he had once considered the ultimate symbol of success. Now it just felt empty. A space filled with expensive things that had never made him happy. He stood at the window, looking out at the city that had been his kingdom. Somewhere out there, Portia was celebrating with people who loved her. Albert was beside her, planning their future together. Their company was changing the world in ways that would outlast both of them. And Arthur was alone with his billions and his regrets. But also, for the first time in his life, with hope. Not hope for reconciliation or redemption. Hope that he could become someone different. Someone who would not repeat the mistakes that had cost him everything worth having. He pulled out his phone and texted his assistant. "Tomorrow morning, I want to meet with the foundation board. I have some ideas about expanding our community investment programs." Her reply came immediately. "Already on your calendar, Mr. Williams. I had a feeling you would want to discuss this." Arthur smiled. His assistant had started predicting his better impulses. That seemed like progress. He set the phone down and looked out at the city once more. Portia Walker had escaped him and built an empire. She had proven that the potential he had dismissed was real. She had shown the world, and more importantly herself, that her worth had never been his to determine. And in doing so, she had given him an unexpected gift. The chance to see himself clearly for the first time. The motivation to become someone capable of seeing others clearly too. It was not the ending Arthur would have chosen. But it was, perhaps, the ending he needed. 1 year after the divorce papers were signed, Portia Walker stood in the lobby of the new Lumina Innovations headquarters. The building was a testament to everything she and Albert had built together. Sustainable energy powered every system. Natural light filled every workspace. The design itself was a statement about the kind of company they wanted to be. But she was not thinking about architecture this morning. She was thinking about the young woman standing nervously in front of her. Her name was Maya. 23 years old, recently graduated from a community college with a degree in environmental science. She had applied for an internship at Lumina with a cover letter that had caught Portia's attention. "I was told that women like me do not belong in STEM," Maya had written. "That my background, my neighborhood, my lack of prestigious credentials made me unsuitable for real scientific work. But then I read about you. About how you built everything in a spare bedroom while people laughed at the idea of you having ambition. And I thought maybe, if you could do it, someone like me could find a way too." Portia had not just offered her an internship. She had asked to meet her personally. "Tell me," Portia said now, looking at the young woman whose nervousness was barely concealed behind professional composure. "What do you want to build?" Maya blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Build? You have ideas. I can see them in your application materials. Half-formed concepts that you did not develop further because no one ever encouraged you to. I want to know what they are." Maya's composure cracked slightly, revealing something underneath. Passion. Drive. The same fire that Portia had suppressed for years before rediscovering it. "I have this idea," Maya began hesitantly. "About using biotechnology to enhance solar cell efficiency. Organic compounds that could improve energy absorption while reducing manufacturing costs. It is probably stupid though. I do not have the background to really develop it properly." Portia smiled. "It is not stupid. And background can be acquired. What matters is whether you have the vision to see possibilities that others miss." She paused, considering the young woman before her. "When I was your age, I was 6 months from completing a PhD. Then I met someone who convinced me that supporting his dreams was more important than pursuing my own. I spent 3 years believing that I was nothing without him. 3 years letting someone else define what I was allowed to want." Maya was listening intently now. "You are standing at a crossroads. There will be people in your life who tell you to shrink. Who dismiss your ideas. Who try to convince you that your role is to support rather than lead. You are going to have to decide whether to believe them." "What did you decide?" Maya asked quietly. "I decided that I would never again give anyone the power to define my worth. And I built an empire from the ashes of everything they tried to burn." Maya's eyes widened. "How do you start? When you have nothing and everyone is telling you that you are nothing?" Portia leaned forward. "You start by remembering that they are wrong. You start by working on your ideas even when no one believes in them but you. You start by refusing to accept other people's limitations as your own. She reached into her desk and pulled out a business card. This is my direct line. I want you to develop that biotechnology concept. Write up a full proposal. Make it as detailed as you can. When you are ready, call me and we will discuss next steps. Maya stared at the card. You do not even know me. I know that someone once looked at me and saw potential that I had forgotten how to see in myself. I know that person's belief changed everything about what I thought was possible. She smiled. Consider this me doing the same for you. Whatever you build from here, build it for yourself. Not for approval. Not for validation. For the simple reason that you have a mind worth using and ideas worth pursuing. Maya took the card with trembling hands. Thank you, Ms. Walker. I will not waste this. I know you will not. After Maya left, Portia sat in her office for a long moment, thinking about cycles and legacy and the things we pass on to the people who come after us. Arthur had passed on damage. Years of